I know it doesn't look like it, but I think this is one of the most disturbing photos in national park history. And the reason I say that is because shortly after this photo was taken, the couple in it disappeared forever. The story you're about to hear has haunted park rangers for decades, and it has three of the most astonishing coincidences that I've ever seen. Many people have suggested that the couple in that photo, Glen and Bessie Hyde, well, their disappearance was simply the result of an accident. But over the years, whispers of a very dark secret have surfaced, hints that perhaps there was no accident after all. Stick around, folks, because the most unsettling, we'll say, twist in this story comes at the very end. In November of 1928, newlyweds Glen and Bessie Hyde departed on the most epic and also tragic honeymoon imaginable. And the crazy thing is that this honeymoon had goals way beyond just celebrating their new marriage. And in order to explain what I mean by that, I need to take you on a virtual trip right now to the Grand Canyon where this mystery actually starts. Now, this trip is totally free, but you gotta hit that subscribe button, especially if you're a repeat viewer, in order to cover your admission. And if this is your first time watching my channel, you can have your admission covered by just commenting down below and telling me where in the world that you are from. All right, let's go to the Grand Canyon. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Now, I think it's safe to say that when Glen and Bessie Hyde visited the Grand Canyon on their honeymoon, again, they had very different intentions, probably from any other couple who had ever visited it. They weren't there, again, to celebrate their marriage, and they weren't even there to take in the scenery. They were there to make themselves rich and famous. By all accounts, the 22-year-old Bessie and her 29-year-old husband, Glen, were about to enter what should have been the best season of their young lives. I mean, you see this all the time, right? From the outside in, the couple had it all, but as is so often the case, especially now we know this with social media and everything, the outside picture of somebody's life doesn't always reveal the truth. Now, Glen had spent much of his childhood and his adult life, for that matter, living and working on his family's farms in the Twin Falls, Idaho area, and in 1928, after they got married, Bessie joined him there. For most normal couples, this farm life probably would have been enough. I mean, I know for a fact there's couples out there right now who dream of this kind of life. But the thing is, Glen and Bessie were not a normal couple. They had what I can only describe as this thirst for adventure that just couldn't be satisfied by working on a small farm. And thus, right after they got married, Glen got to work formulating a insane plan, we'll say, that would bring the couple the adventure that they so desperately desired and also make them rich and famous in the process. But before I tell you about that crazy plan, I need to tell you about something else, which would be Magic Spoon. That's right, folks. Magic Spoon is the sponsor of this video, and I gotta tell you, I've been feeling a bit nostalgic for my childhood lately. And thanks to Magic Spoon, I can eat cereal, treats like this one, and granola like this. I can eat these things that I used to eat when I was a kid, but instead of them being full of sugar and other crap like that, they're full of high quality fueling ingredients. Oh, and they're also full of protein. And if you don't believe me, let me hit you with the facts. Ready? Actually, sorry. Are you okay? That was a little aggressive. I'm sorry for hitting you, but I'm just fired up about Magic Spoon, okay? So they're delicious treats like this one right here contain 11 to 12 grams of protein, only 1 gram of sugar, and only 1 to 2 grams of net carbs. And like I just said a second ago, they just launched their brand new granola, which has 13 grams of protein, 0 added sugar, and it comes in 3 different awesome flavors, which are honey almond, mixed berry, and this one right here, which is peanut butter, which is my personal favorite. So if you need some high protein fuel for your next adventure, or a new food option for your low carb lifestyle, or you just want to relive your childhood without all of the excess sugar that you used to eat when you were a child, I'm telling you, Magic Spoon is for you. You can use my code HIKING or click the link at the top of the description to try Magic Spoon treats or granola today, and you're gonna get $5 off your order when you do that. Oh, and by the way, Magic Spoon is so confident in their product that it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee online, so if you don't like it, they will refund your money, no questions asked. Okay, let's get back to the story. So back to Glen's really ambitious, crazy plan that I told you about before the ad there. So his plan was to turn the new couple's honeymoon into a record-breaking feat that would allow them to leave their boring farm life behind forever. Sounds great on paper, right? Well, there is just one problem with this plan, and that is that it was going to be much more dangerous than Glen had ever imagined. So Glen convinced Bessie that the couple should spend their honeymoon traveling down the Green and Colorado rivers in this homemade 20-foot wooden boat that Glen had made. And this idea, this plan, came with two important goals. Goal number one was to beat the speed record for this particular route. And goal number two was to make Bessie the very first woman in history to successfully navigate the treacherous waters through the Grand Canyon. Now, it's important to understand that by the year 1928, the public had become mesmerized by these stories of daring outdoor adventurers who were pushing the boundaries of human potential to new heights. Think people like, I don't know, George Mallory and Andrew Irvin, who just 4 years prior had disappeared while attempting to summit Mount Everest for the very first time. And just 1 year earlier, Charles Lindbergh had made history by successfully completing the first transatlantic flight. I'm telling you, the public was just craving these new records, these new stories when it came to the outdoors and these things. And so Glen Hyde had this vision of him and Bessie breaking those two records I told you about earlier in the Grand Canyon, and then returning home to wild media attention, speech invitations, and enough opportunities to kind of cash in on their records, to make money from them, that the couple would never need to spend another day working on the farm ever again. I told you there was a problem with it, and I need to get into that now. I told you it was dangerous, and in case you don't believe me, I need to note that while Glen did have a lot of experience on the river, he had completed a couple different multi-day river trips before. He had built boats, things like that. Well, his wife, Bessie, she had zero boating experience. None. Absolutely nothing whatsoever. She had never navigated violent rapids like the ones that the couple would see every single day on this trip. And as if that's not bad enough, it's been rumored that perhaps Bessie wasn't even really as into this idea as her husband was. That's not confirmed, but it has been suggested that Glen was really the one pushing this, and Bessie kind of just went along with it. Now, I don't know if that means she didn't want to go at all, and she clearly was very capable, but I don't know. Regardless of that, on October 20th, the Hydes' journey began when they left the town of Green River, Utah. They pushed off into the river, with their homemade boat, and they began floating away from civilization with nothing except for their ambition and the promise of uncharted waters ahead. They dreamed of re-emerging weeks later back into civilization, not as ordinary explorers, but as icons with newfound fame and wealth beyond their wildest aspirations. And in a very ironic twist of fate, this trip would actually end up making the Hydes famous. That fame would just come for all the wrong reasons. The first few weeks of the couple's adventure actually went surprisingly well. I mean, sure, they had, each been thrown out of the boat over the course of a few different incidences on the rapids. Oh, and another riverman had compared their homemade boat to a coffin. Oh yeah, and they made the decision to not take any life jackets with them. But, despite all of that stuff, I do have to give them some credit because by November 8th, they had traveled a pretty considerable distance and were basically knocking on the front door of the Grand Canyon. But before they entered the Grand Canyon, Glen and Bessie made a very brief stop into the outpost of Lee's Ferry. Now, in my opinion, this particular part of the story has been largely overlooked by a lot of people, and I say that because it's in Lee's Ferry that Glen and Bessie were given a very direct, dire warning about what could happen to them if they continued down the river. A small group of locals in Lee's Ferry, a group of people who were intimately familiar with that river, with the terrain that the couple would be facing ahead, they pleaded with Glen and Bessie to abandon their journey. They told the Hydes that their small boat would not be sufficient to carry them through the rapids that they were going to be facing. They told them that not taking life vests was basically a dance with death itself. They told them all these things. They warned them, dude, and Glen and Bessie didn't listen. They had already persevered through mile after mile of deadly rapids. Their confidence was clearly running very high, and tragically, they completely ignored all of the warnings that they were given. They pushed off from Lee's Ferry, they continued on down the river, and for the next couple days at least, their decision seemed to have been vindicated. Finally, Glen and Bessie entered the Grand Canyon, and they successfully navigated the Colorado River's treacherous waters for just a couple days before making their next resupply stop at Grand Canyon Village. On November 15th, 1928, they docked their boat, and then they hiked up to the rim of the Grand Canyon, where they eventually introduced themselves to a man named Emery Kolb. Emery Kolb was a very well-known photographer who actually ran a studio that sat right up against the edge of the Grand Canyon. An absolutely beautiful place to have a studio like this. And given Glen's ambition to achieve this fame through the journey that they were on, it's no surprise that he approached the prominent photographer, Emery Kolb, asking him to capture a few portraits of himself and Bessie. The result of this request was these photos right here. They show the couple, who had now been on the river for 26 days, by the way, looking weathered, a little bit tired, but largely in good spirits. Glen and Bessie told Emery that they would return to the village after their journey was over in order to retrieve these photos. That would give Emery some time to develop them. It makes total sense. They would just come back for the photos later. But, as fate would have it, the couple would never see the images that you just saw a second ago. Now, Emery was very fascinated with the Hydes and their journey, and he spent a considerable amount of time with them while they were in Grand Canyon Village. He was fascinated, but he was also very worried, and so he also spent a considerable amount of time trying to convince them to abandon their journey, just like the locals had done a few days earlier in Lee's Ferry. And this is where it starts to get a little weird. He wasn't just concerned for their safety. He felt like something was off between the couple. Particularly, something was off with Bessie. She never outright said it, but Emery got the sense that Bessie was kind of scared. She didn't really feel comfortable continuing on. So he tries to convince them, particularly Glen, to, go home. Don't risk your lives doing this, but he fails at this. And so as kind of a last resort, a fallback, he offered the couple his spare life vests. At least, if you guys are going to continue on, wear these life vests. It's going to be much safer. But Glen refused this request. I mean, without reason or hesitation even, he turned down these life vests. And his reasoning for this remains a mystery to this day, as far as I'm aware. But folks, it gets even weirder, because just as the couple were preparing to hike back down into the canyon, back down to their boat, Emery's daughter kind of came up to the group, and Apparently, she caught Bessie's attention. The little girl, who was neatly dressed and she was just pristine, she was clean, well, she stood in very sharp contrast to the Hydes, who were obviously, almost 30 days into this trip through the wilderness. They were rugged and weathered, almost a month of living out in the wild like this. You get this clean girl, you get this dirty pair of adventurers. And so, taking particular interest in the little girl's shoes, Bessie commented, quote, "I wonder if I'll ever wear pretty shoes again." Those were her exact words. It's unclear what she meant by this comment. Maybe it was just kind of a slip up, or she didn't express herself right, or maybe she was just trying to compliment the girl and her shoes. I don't know. You can't deny that it is a very disturbing comment given the events that I'm about to tell you about next. As the Hydes were leaving Grand Canyon Village, they agreed to allow a man who was named Adolph Suttrue to join them for a short stint on the river. It's not exactly clear to me who this guy was or even why he joined them or why they let him join, but one thing is definitely clear, which is the Hyde's boat and Glen's leadership made Adolph extremely uncomfortable. So uncomfortable, in fact, that Adolph parted ways with the Hydes at the very first opportunity which presented itself. To Adolph, the group's boat was not sufficient to handle the increasingly violent rapids of the Grand Canyon. He also felt that Glen was struggling to navigate, and he was concerned that the couple didn't tie up the boat when they made camp each night. But most strikingly, Adolph noticed that Bessie also seemed to be uncomfortable and scared, which is an observation that is in line with what Emery Kolb had noticed only a few days earlier. About 2 days after they left Grand Canyon Village, the group pulled into an outpost known as Hermit Camp. And when they did this, Adolph got the hell off of their boat. They all ate lunch with a few of the locals there, and then Adolph took this photo of Glen and Bessie. As I'm sure you remember, this is the same photo that I showed at the beginning of the video, because this is the last photo ever taken of Glen and Bessie Hyde. Unlike the photos that were taken by Emery Kolb just a few days earlier, in this photo, the couple looks extremely tired and extremely worn out. Glen looks cold and emotionless, his expression as rigid as stone, while Bessie's eyes tell a very different story. They're wide, they're pleading, almost as if she was silently screaming for help. After this photo was taken, the couple went back to their boat, they launched into the Colorado River once again, and then they vanished forever. The date was November 18th, 1928. Multiple weeks went by before anybody realized that the Hydes were missing. And this makes sense. They had been traveling in the backcountry after all, and it's not like back then they had cell phones or satellite messengers to stay in touch with people. And so it wasn't abnormal for them to go long periods of time without checking in with anybody. But by the first week of December, it was very clear that something had gone wrong, that the couple was in fact missing, and that's when a formal search was launched. This search was unsuccessful for almost 2 weeks, but then, on December 19th, a search plane that was flying high over the Grand Canyon noticed something very, very important. At the end of the canyon, this plane's pilot spotted an empty boat that was snagged on some rocks, completely standstill, right there in the middle of the Colorado River. Due to the remoteness of this area, it wouldn't be until a few days later, around Christmas Eve, that the boat was finally reached, via the river. And its state of discovery only deepened the mystery of what the hell had happened to Glen and Bessie. You see, the boat was still floating, and it was completely undamaged. There was a little bit of water in the bottom of it, but it was far from capsized. And this stood in very stark contrast to the assumption that the couple had wrecked their boat and died/disappeared as a result. It was very strange that the boat was still in working condition when it was found. And even more strange was the fact that the couple's gear and all of their belongings, well, it was all in order. Everything was strapped down inside the boat. Everything was organized. It wasn't a mess. It didn't look like anything strange had happened. Some of the items that were still inside the boat were the couple's camera, Bessie's journal, and also Glen's gun, which, those are some things that the couple probably would have taken with them if they had abandoned the boat intentionally. Literally, I'm telling you, nothing else was missing from the boat. The only thing that was missing at all was Glen and Bessie themselves. The film that was inside the couple's camera was developed, and Bessie's journal was also analyzed. And these two things revealed that the couple were alive and well as late as November 30th, which was day 42 of their trip. But after that date, there were no more journal entries and there were no more photos taken. And folks, to this day, no confirmed trace of either Glen or Bessie has ever been found. However, this is not the end of our story. Things are about to get a lot weirder and frankly a little bit disturbing as we discuss the potential theories about what happened to them. So the most obvious and the prevailing explanation for their disappearance is that Glen and Bessie had an accident and then they died on the river. Now again, it's strange that their boat was in the condition it was when it was found, and that kind of contradicts this theory, but then again, there are some people out there that have suggested that maybe they were forced to abandon their boat, or maybe it floated away from their campsite one night because they didn't tie it up, and then the couple tried to hike their way out, hike their way back to safety, and then died in the process of doing that. And I'll be honest with you, all that stuff is very plausible, but there have been 3 extremely bizarre twists in this story over the past multiple decades. And these twists have taken this mystery to a whole new level of weirdness. Here's what I mean. So in 1971, over 40 years after Glen and Bessie had disappeared, a group of rafters were on a multi-day guided trip through the Grand Canyon on the Colorado River when they made camp very close to the spot where Glen and Bessie's boat had been found abandoned. This group, they gathered around the campfire at the end of the day, and their guide began to tell the story of Glen and Bessie's disappearance. They're in the middle of this incredible story that took place so close to where they were camping when all of a sudden, one of the quiet, elderly members of this guided group interrupted and blurted out that she herself was Bessie Hyde. This woman said that her husband, Glen, had been forcing her to continue with this river trip, and he had been very abusive, and one day she just snapped and she stabbed him to death and then hid his body and then fled the canyon on foot in order to go start a new life. The river guide and the people who heard this woman's story obviously reported it, and they started to investigate it, and that begs a couple questions, of course. Were this woman's claims true? And was she really Bessie Hyde, deciding to come clean after all of these years? And the truth is that, in all likelihood, she was not. It turns out this woman's real name was Elizabeth Cutler, and an investigation revealed that she was a retired psychologist who had this reputation for kind of just messing with people, essentially, playing mind games with them. In fact, when she was interviewed after this guided trip was over, she denied ever claiming to be Bessie Hyde. And this very bizarre twist in the story was basically dismissed as a dead end. But the weirdness doesn't stop there. In fact, it's actually just getting started. So a few years after this woman bizarrely came out and said she was Bessie Hyde, Emery Kolb, again, who was one of the last individuals to see the Hydes alive, well, Emery passed away. Remember, he owns this studio, this property right on the rim of the Grand Canyon. And so after he died, his studio was searched. And by the way, once again, this is the very same studio that he photographed the Hydes at before their disappearance. And while his studio was being searched, a very disturbing discovery was made. A skull with a bullet hole in it, by the way, was found on Emery's property. And of course, this fueled wild speculation that the skull belonged to Glen Hyde, and perhaps he was murdered by Emery so that Emery could run off with Bessie or something like that. Emery, of course, was no longer alive when all of this speculation started, and he was therefore unable to deny any of these rumors. And so they actually persisted for many, many years beyond this discovery. It is very strange, right? Why would Emery have literally kept a skeleton in his closet for years and years and years without telling anyone? That question remains unanswered to this day. But the question of whether or not Emery killed Glen Hyde has been answered. And as you probably have guessed, the answer is that he didn't. Forensic testing was done, as well as, forensic comparisons between Glen's facial structure and the face of this unknown skull. And all of these tests concluded that the skull did not belong to Glen. And folks, it doesn't stop there. So now let's flash forward to 1992. And this is the year when the famous Grand Canyon rafter named Georgie Clark passed away. Georgie was very well known in the Grand Canyon, in the rafting community, even famous, you could say, for being the very first woman to become a commercial river guide in the Grand Canyon. She had devoted much of her life to the waters of the Colorado River, and she was basically a legend in the national park. And after she died, her friends and her family were kind of organizing her belongings when they made a couple very shocking discoveries. First, they found a small pistol that was hidden among her possessions. Then, they found her birth certificate, which shockingly stated that Georgie wasn't even her original name. Apparently, Georgie Clark had changed her name after she became an adult, and this birth certificate proved that her original name was Bessie DeRoss. If her original name was Bessie, why would she have changed it? It's a very interesting question, and this isn't the end of it either, because in what I find to be the most shocking twist probably in this entire story, Georgie's friends and her family found among her possessions the marriage certificate for Glen and Bessie Hyde. You heard that right. I fact-checked this as much as I could because it almost sounds unbelievable. It sounds crazy, right? Why would this woman have Glen and Bessie's marriage certificate? When these discoveries were reported, this obviously started a lot of chatter about whether Georgie Clark, who had spent so much time on the river in the Grand Canyon, was actually Bessie Hyde herself, this missing woman from the Grand Canyon. There were always these rumors that Bessie Hyde had killed Glen and then ran off and she started a new life. And so these discoveries found among Georgie Clark's possessions only fueled the flames for this theory. However, despite the coincidence of Georgie changing her name from Bessie and also having possession of Bessie Hyde's marriage certificate, this theory that Georgie really was Bessie Hyde has been largely discredited. Once again, Georgie Clark was very famous. Her life was very well documented. And though she did bear a resemblance to Bessie Hyde, historians have made detailed comparisons between their appearances and concluded that they're not the same person. Of course, that still doesn't really explain why Georgie Clark had possession of the marriage certificate, but it's likely that she got it over the years just through her connections within the Grand Canyon rafting community. But still, it's very, very strange, even a little bit unsettling, isn't it? Chances are that Glen and Bessie died in an accident on the river and were just never found. But given all of these coincidences over the years, I don't know, they just give me this gut feeling that there's got to be something more to this story that we don't know about. So I don't know. Do you agree with that? Like, let me know what you think about this entire story. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And I hope that all of you now understand why I think that this is one of the most interesting, disturbing, insert adjective here, mysteries in national park history. This one just really, really leaves me scratching my head. Now, with that said, YouTube seems to think that you'll like this video next, so give it a click right now, go watch it. And of course, thank you all so much for tuning in. You're the best subscribers on YouTube. You guys have changed my life, and I'll see you in the next video.